Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, veterans, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Peter Mansbridge to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. We all know Peter as the face of our nation for 30 years at 10 o'clock every evening. But Peter is a very accomplished individual, and on the back of our program there is a write-up about Peter. But as the chief news correspondent for CBC and the chief news anchor, Order of Canada, chancellor of several universities, he also has a special connection to World War II. His father, Wing Commander Stanley Mansbridge, DFC, Distinguished Flying Cross, led the raid on Peenemünde, the German rocket center. So it's indeed a pleasure to see Peter again. We had a chance to fly with Peter in the Lancaster. He brought his father's Distinguished Flying Cross with him that day back a number of years ago. And when I asked him if he would be our guest speaker this year, although he was not in Canada, he without hesitation said yes. So we're very thankful, and it's our honor to welcome Peter. Please.
Thank you, and good morning. You know, when I remember that day well, it was about 6 months ago that David sent me an email and asked me if I would take part in this service and make a few remarks during the service. I didn't hesitate for a second. And why? For the same reason that you're here today. I have enormous respect for this place and for those who are remembered here, not just on November 11th, but every day people come into this museum, they remember. But this, of course, as Dave said, is a special day. I also remember in the 1980s, while VRA, the Lancaster, was still under restoration here, that I brought my father out to Hamilton to see it. And I recall very well him getting up inside, amazed that he was still able to do it, amazed at how tight the quarters were on that plane. He couldn't believe that he'd done 2 tours of operations during the Second World War, most of them on Lancasters, just like VRA. I saw him standing there inside, quietly looking around, knowing full well that he was remembering his times on board the Lancaster, the friends he made, the friends he lost. It was an emotional moment for him and for me watching him. Now, sadly, he never got the opportunity to go up in VRA. But since his passing, I've been in it a couple of times with David, once to shoot a documentary, mini doc for the CBC, and the other time I took my son, Will, on the plane as well. We prided ourselves in being convinced that we're one of a very small select group where 3 generations of our family have flown on a Lancaster. It was such a special moment. As Dave says, we took the Distinguished Flying Cross, the DFC medal that had been awarded to my father by the King in Buckingham Palace in 1944. We took it up with us, and I didn't tell Dave we were going to do this, but when we were flying over the beautiful landscape of southern Ontario and Lake Ontario, I brought it out and showed it to him. And I think he was as emotional as we were in that moment. So that's why this place is special for me. Now, I want to tell you two other stories. One, you have to kind of take your mind back to August of 1944. A plane somewhat similar to the Canso behind me. It's called a short Sunderland. It was a seaplane, but it was considerably bigger, if you can imagine, than this Canso. It had 4 big engines. It was a double-decker plane. And it carried a crew of 15. It was preparing to take off from the water outside of Invergordon, Scotland. And of the 15 crew who boarded that night, 12 were Canadian. Technically, there were 11 plus a Newfoundlander. Newfoundland hadn't joined Canada until 1949. But I think they all knew they were going to. So I think of it as 12 Canadians boarding that flight. They had trained for a couple of years as part of the Commonwealth Air Training Plan across the country, across our country. They trained as pilots, some as navigators, some as radio technicians, some as bomb aimers. This flight, that plane, the short Sunderland, was designed to go after Nazi submarines. They bombed them from the air. This crew was still training. They took off at 11 o'clock at night. They knew their stuff. As I said, they trained at different bases across Canada. And they met up in that summer of 1944 for the first time as a group to work out of a RAF base at Alness, which is near Invergordon. So they got on that plane, they took off from the waters, and they flew over the North Sea, northwards. Obviously, if they'd seen a submarine, they would have taken action. But for the most part, this was a training mission. They had set out some water buoys, and they were going to bomb the buoys. But when they got north, around midnight that night, the weather closed in. Hear that? The weather closed in, and they were ordered to come back to base, to turn around. They'd only been in the air about 45 minutes. So they headed back. But somewhere in the bad weather, things got mixed up. And instead of flying over the sea, they ended up flying over land. And those are the highlands of northern Scotland. That means hills, mountains. And they crashed into one of those hills. And in an instant, everyone was killed. All of those young Canadians killed in an instant. Now, how do I know this story? I spent half the year now in Scotland. I was driving by a church on the northeast coast of Scotland, about an hour north of Inverness. And when we slowed down at the church, there was a sign outside, war graves, Commonwealth war graves. And whenever I see a sign like that, whether I'm traveling in the UK or in Europe or Hong Kong, I stop for the very possibility that there may be Canadians buried there. So I stopped, I went in, and amongst all the gravestones from centuries ago, there was a line of 12 stones. This was the crew of the short Sunderland that had taken off in August of '44. They were all buried there. I don't know how often anybody comes But I went, my son went, my wife went, and we remembered. We remembered these guys. And then I did my research and found out their story. So the lesson for me in that story is we had some great heroes in past conflicts, and you heard Dave list them all off. But all the heroes were those who served, all of them. They might not have had a special mission, a special action that they took part in. These guys didn't. They were training, and they became statistics in the thousands of those who lost their lives simply on training missions during the Second World War. Now, you know who's not forgotten? The people of Scotland. In a little town not far from there, right near the hill that they crashed into, 75 years later, town leaders went to the hill with a plaque and put it there. And there's a little inscription on it. This is an area of Scotland where it rains a lot. There's a little inscription on there. The rain is tears for you, the fallen. They're remembered. Their service was remembered, just like we do today for all those who served our country. Now, here's my last story. I'm so impressed to see so many young people here, classes from a couple of different schools in the area. Because if we're going to keep remembering, we have to pass this ability on to future generations. I went to school in Ottawa, a high school called Glebe Collegiate, which is an old school. It's built in the 1920s. And I can recall when I used to go to school and walk in the front door, there was a plaque at the front door of those who'd served in the Second World War, students from Glebe and teachers from Glebe who'd served. And I might have looked at it once or twice and never thought about it again. But a couple of years ago, a teacher teaching grade 10 history at Glebe by the name of Jessica McIntyre decided she was going to do something about those names on the plaque in the hall. So what did she do? She talked to her grade 10 class, said, we're going to have a project, a year-long project. We're going to find out who those kids were and those teachers, where they lived in the Glebe, which is the area around the school. We'll find out where their houses were. Long since left by their families, but that's where they grew up. And like all the soldiers and airmen and naval personnel who lost their lives in the Second World War serving Canada, they never came home. They're buried either at sea or in Europe. Their project was, let's bring them home. Not literally, but in kindness. They researched every one of these different students who had passed during the war. They found out where they'd lived, where they passed, what they'd done, what their rank was, the whole bit. And they made up signs, and they took them to each house during Remembrance Week, planted the signs on the lawn. Obviously, the new homeowners had thought this was a great idea. There was a QR code on the sign where anybody could go by, take the QR code, and find out the story of this person. This was their way as a class of bringing them home. And I thought, what a fantastic idea that was. And still is. They're in the third year of doing it now. and a future generation will benefit from the research of this generation, who are looking at the stories of 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations ago. So remembering, that's why we're here today. That's why we're lucky to live in the country we live in, thanks in no small part to the people who today we are remembering. Thank you very much.